Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold while I hoard internet cringe. Normally, while I browse Reddit for new material, I will come across plenty of individuals who let their romantic desires override their better judgment, which often leads to a very awkward situation at the table. You would be surprised how often this actually happens. Most of the time, these love-struck individuals are men. However, today I am bringing you a story of a different kind. That's right. Here at Den of the Drake, we are an equal opportunity narrator, which means I'll gladly poke fun at creeps regardless of gender. Today's story revolves around creepiness of the female variety. Let no man accuse this dragon of being biased. Regardless of who you are, if you are a weirdo at a D&D table, I will gladly take my time to narrate your horror story and mock you openly on the internet. Now, without further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG-Horror-Stories. Enjoy. This story is titled, Player attempts to seduce DM both in character and out of character. Causes complete collapse of gaming group and even an IRL breakup. The whole situation was bizarre, unexpected, and came completely out of nowhere in a rapid and complete fiery implosion of the group that rivaled the Hindenburg in terms of suddenness and sheer scale of catastrophic collapse. So sit back, dear reader, and indulge in this tale of deceit, coercion, questionable sexual appetites, breakups, and of course, cringe. Lots and lots of cringe. The cast consists of me, DM. Dave, my roommate playing a half-orc fighter, was not present for the session in question, relevant later. Annie, Dave's girlfriend, playing a halfling cleric. Rich, a friend of mine and Dave's, playing a zany gnome sorcerer. Trish, the problem player, playing a fox folk, reskin tabaxi, bard, because of course she bloody was. She could also never quite decide whether this person was more of a cat, or a fox, or both. It was weird. So we cast our minds back to the days of yore, 2013. I was at university, and we were playing 3.5 edition, D&D. For context, I'm not really the typical nerd archetype. I'm fairly tall, fairly muscular, and my biggest interest outside of TTRPGs, science, math, nerdy movies, and video games, is playing rugby, and I was on the uni team. I am, or was, being an adult sucks, something of a socialite. I like to host parties, I love being the center of attention, I love singing. In short, my highest IRL stat is charisma. My lowest, apparently, is wisdom. Yes, I am a dude bro. Yes, the exact stereotype you're currently thinking of. That one. It's me. After one such get-together at my place, which was inevitably a strange mix of guys from the rugby team, my course mates, and my flatmates, myself, Dave, and Annie were talking. I suggested the idea of running a D&D game, and they were both into it. Neither of them had played before, but Dave informed me that our mutual friend Rich played, which I didn't know. And Annie said that she had a friend that would be super excited to join because she was obsessed with TTRPGs. Enter Trish. Trish was the only person who attended that I didn't know, which naturally made her something of a wild card. But being the sociable person that I was, this didn't bother me at all. And when I first met her, all seemed fine. She was lively and excitable. Her and Annie both did practical effects design. And she was artsy and enthusiastic with a real twinkle in her eye, which I would realize all too late wasn't a twinkle, but the barely perceptible electrical feedback, which indicated the short-circuiting of the sanity wires in her brain. I thought she would be a joy to have at the table rolling dice with us. If I had only known the depth of the anime love interest complex she apparently had, I might have realized that the rattling noise wasn't her dice tower, but all the loose marbles rattling around inside her skull. So anyway, from the very first session, the group was great, and everyone's characters were fun, if a little tropey. This is why I didn't bat an eyelid at Trish playing up that bard and hitting on every NPC. We had a good laugh about it, and I responded with NPCs flirting or not flirting in the exact same manner as they would with Dave's character, who often tried his luck to all of our amusement, with his -1 to charisma checks. Thus, I thought that it was all in good fun, and so did everyone else. Because nobody could be insane enough to think that imaginary characters interacting automatically meant that the DM wants to bone them, right? Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. There were some red flags. Minor ones by the standards of this subreddit, to be sure. These included highlights such as Trish being a little obsessive about anime and talking about her perfect man being an exact description of some protagonist from a particular anime, the name of which I don't remember, and the way in which she described her tabaxi, complete with big innocent doe eyes and playful curves and swaying hips. She also showed up wearing fox ears at one point. I thought she was just getting really into the game and playing into her character, which, in a really disturbing sort of way, was right on the money. She also had this weird habit of maintaining eye contact with me for an uncomfortably long period of time. But I, with my IRL dump stat in wisdom, didn't put together that she might have a crush on me, in case where this story is leading isn't horrifyingly obvious. I was enjoying the group and the immersion. Everyone spent a lot of time talking in character and really getting into it, including Dave and Annie, who had been a little bit hesitant about RP at first. Trish spent almost no time whatsoever talking out of character, another mild red flag that I overlooked entirely, but one that stands out from the rest in this little retrospective. And so, dear reader, begins the fateful night. Note that Dave, my roommate, was not present for this session, for the night is dark and filled with fox-eared discomfort. It was an RP-heavy session. The previous had been a sizable combat session, with one of the villains and a small side story arc that had been completed. So there was a lot of looting, paying off debts, favors, collecting accolades, drinking in bars, being paraded around on the shoulders of the liberated village, all the normal tropes. This also coincided with the end of our second-year exam period, so we were in a similar IRL mood. Everyone was having a great time in a low-pressure session, drinking a decent amount both in real life and in-game. Everyone was smiling and having fun. Trish's character decided that tonight was the night to try and get it on with the burly human bartender NPC that she had been flirting with throughout the campaign whenever they had been in this town. Again, I only picked up on this in retrospect, but this was the NPC who most closely, although not even that f***ing closely, resembled me in how I had described them. And she has singled out this NPC repeatedly. Anyway, in the revelry of the villain's defeat and the town celebration, she succeeded on her seduction role for this poor bartender. I made a joke about them going off to make very scratchy cat love, for which he will probably need his back bandaged, and attempted a fade to black. Trish was having none of it. Obviously, she wanted to vicariously play out this encounter between these two abstractions in a display that would have made Sigmund Freud himself make the concerned Tom face. She interjected, describing about how her character waited for him to go get her drinks before taking off all her clothes, changing into one of his thin shirts, and waiting on his bed in a seductive pose, and began to purr. Okay, it wouldn't be a Den of the Drake video if I didn't interject with my own thoughts. Now, I can't really get into running these kind of encounters in too much detail, or else Susan will demonetize me. But I will say this. For the love of God, please fade to black. More sensual encounters tend to be the more ideal catalysts for awkward scenarios at your table. I mean, unless you have all explicitly stated that you want to run one of those games, not my cup of tea, but no judgment, there really is no excuse not to fade to black. In my experience, sensual encounters tend to immediately break immersion. That's no longer a beautiful elven maiden spending a passionate night with a dashing human ranger. That's the DM, Frank, and your cousin Zachary. Both of them are grown men, and it just got really weird. Basically, to sum it up, you're better off just fading to black than assuming everyone at your table is going to be cool with it. Because 9 times out of 10, there's going to be at least one person at your table who wishes they could do a backflip off a 12-story building when you start getting into the explicit details. Alright, that's going to be enough free DMing advice from me for one video. Back to the story. Okay, a little too much detail. And she has a creepy, lascivious look in her eyes when she describes it. But fine, she's had a couple of drinks and is a little bit too into it. I once again try to fade to black with, and as he sees you, he shuts the door behind himself with a smile. Anyway, back in the bar, Clumperdunk is in the middle of his absurd levitating tankards performance when Trish again interjects, pouting a little bit this time. She describes how her character stares into his green eyes. My eyes are green. The NPC was described as having blue eyes. And runs her clawed fingers through his brown hair. Again, you guessed it, matches the description of me and not the NPC. She is now positively leering at me like I'm a cartoon steak. Rich catches on to this and looks about as uncomfortable as I feel. Annie is giggling. I assumed that this was just nervous laughter. Not so. I quite firmly cut to black, but Trish looks oddly satisfied and spends the rest of the session, which lasts less than half an hour, just staring at me and exchanging looks with Annie. At the end of the session, I'm sat with the 3 of them, finishing drinks before they all head home. Trish asks to use the bathroom and excuses herself. Annie then gets up and declares that she's going home and asks if poor innocent bystander Rich will walk her across campus. They abruptly leave. I wait for Trish to come out of my room for 5 minutes. At this point, I'm like, if she's taking a dump in there, that's such an absolute piss take, just wait until you get home. So I walk into my room, preparing to knock on the bathroom door. And what do I fucking see? I see Trish. And what, dear reader, do you expect she's wearing? Yup, that's right. There's a pile of her clothes and underwear at the foot of my bed. And her sole item of clothing is one of my t-shirts. And her f***ing fox ears, laying in what she apparently thought was a seductive pose. If the only time you had heard the word seduction was in Japanese, and the sentence ended with senpai. And if this scene wasn't absurd and insane enough, she also f***ing purrs at me before giving me this look, which basically amounted to her stuffing as much of her bottom lip under her teeth as is reasonably possible in what appeared to be an attempt to devour her own chin, while blinking rapidly like she was trying to convey something in Morse code. Now, Trish is not an unattractive woman by any means, even in the midst of a mating ritual considerably more bizarre than anything I've heard Sir David Attenborough narrate. I am absolutely not into her whatsoever. I do not see her in that way, and honestly find her a bit weird. Shocking, I know. This should be a good enough reason on its own. But what takes this from uncomfortable and awkward to shockingly inappropriate is that at this time, I had a girlfriend, which she and everyone at the table knew. At this point, I'm standing in the doorway, probably looking like I've seen a fucking ghost, and my brain has turned to mush trying to decipher the incomprehensible spectacle unfolding before my eyes. She then stops deep-throating her chin and says, "If you want your t-shirt back, you'll have to take it off me." Pardon me, I just had to start violently retching because I had to read that out loud while pretending to be a Catgirl. I am now legitimately pissed off with her for this level of inappropriate behavior. I tell her as calmly as possible that she can keep the t-shirt, but she needs to leave. She scowls at me, and I truly wish I was joking, hisses at me like a cat. Despite how deeply uncomfortable and annoyed I am, it is an act of such sheer abject absurdity that I can't help but burst out laughing. She immediately loses her shit. She grabs her clothes in a bundle and runs outside my flat in just my t-shirt, not stopping to even put on underwear, screaming at me the whole way. Apparently, either Annie or Rich has forgotten something, so they're only about 100 meters away, walking back towards the flats. They, and everyone else around, see this 2/3 naked cat/fox woman throwing a hyper tantrum over getting rejected, creating an utter spectacle in the quad, which is overlooked by several blocks of halls, not to mention other students who just happen to be outside. I would have been mortified if I wasn't too busy being somewhere between utter speechless disbelief and repressing uncontrolled mirth. Annie runs over and throws her coat over the now hysterically crying Trish, then starts berating me, calling me selfish and ungrateful, and telling me how Trish is better for me than my then girlfriend. I'm in utter shock and disbelief at this point. This is totally out of character for Annie. Now, knowing what I do in the midst of this bizarre and mutually humiliating meltdown, I just gave an apologetic wave and a grimace to Rich. I went inside and closed the door. I called Dave and fill him in on whatever the fuck just happened. He's as baffled, shocked, and angry as I am, especially after I describe Annie's reaction. He calls her and demands to know what the fuck is going on. As it turns out, Trish and Annie had concocted the events of the evening together. Annie had informed Trish that Dave would not be present, making it a good night to make her move. And Trish had apparently described the rest of her cringe-inducingly misguided plan. This is also why Annie was giggling at Trish's in-character shenanigans earlier in the night, and why she had so abruptly convinced Rich to leave with her when Trish had asked to use my bathroom. This, it seems, was the signal. Dave called me almost 2 hours later, which was about 4 a.m. at this point, and said that he had just had a huge argument and shouting match with Annie over the phone, and that they had broken up. I received a text from Rich the next day, saying that he didn't want to play with us anymore because he couldn't handle the drama. Although I explained to him that Trish would absolutely not be there again, I couldn't really begrudge his decision to leave, with such a sour taste in his mouth. I blocked Trish's number almost immediately after she left, and the only correspondence I had with Annie was a text from her that just said, "Kit," before I blocked her too. Dave and I never played D&D together again, though we are still friends to this day. So that's it, Reddit. That's my one and only horror story. And most of it had absolutely nothing to do with the actual game. Sometimes the creepy predatory weirdo isn't a basement-dwelling neckbeard, but a pretty girl half your size, and with more screws loose than a piece of IKEA furniture your grandma tried to put together, who apparently thinks acting like an anime cat fox woman is the height of seduction. End of story. So, I actually really enjoyed reading this story because I really related to OP on a personal level. In real life, I don't really look like the kind of person you'd expect to be playing D&D. I'm a bit of a jock, to be honest. I remember the first time I played D&D years and years ago, I was actually trying to get with a girl, and she invited me to a D&D session. So I arrived, and I remember the first thing I thought was like, what is with all this nerd shit? Well, here I am with a YouTube channel that's dedicated entirely to D&D, so something must have stuck, right? Anyway, let's go ahead and look at this week's Gallery of the Drake to try to bleach the memory of my Catgirl impression from our brains, huh? This week's art piece is done by viewer Skyrogue77. This canvas painting surely rivals the likes of Picasso and Van Gogh simply for its subject matter, which is me, sitting upon my hoard of internet cringe. Thank you so much for painting this beautiful piece of art, Skyrogue. It means the world to me. If you want to get your artwork featured on the channel, be sure to send it to the email address in my About section. I love that I can create content that inspires artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and end the video there. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.